Oxford, 1555. Two men were tied to separate stakes with thick hemp ropes. The crowd was not silent. There were insults, sobs, prayers. One of the condemned, Nicholas Ridley, was visibly trembling. The other, Hugh Latimer, kept his gaze forward. From an elevated, discreet position, Queen Mary watched in silence. It was not a symbolic appearance. She was there because she wanted to be. She sought no intermediaries. She wanted to see the fire cleanse what the kingdom had tolerated for too long. These two men were not ordinary criminals. They had been bishops, influential figures during the previous reign, defenders of the Protestant Reformation. They were tried, condemned, and ultimately purified by living fire. "Be of good cheer, Master Ridley," said Latimer, "and play the man. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England as shall never be put out." Minutes later, the flames rose up both their legs. Ridley screamed. Latimer stayed silent. The smoke slowly rose, and in the shadows stood Queen Mary Thrawn of England, Mary. I was not an impulsive tyrant. She was something far more dangerous, a true believer. The daughter of a devout queen and a king who broke with Rome, she grew up surrounded by rejection, isolation, and scandal. And when she reached the throne, her goal was clear. What her father had destroyed, she would restore, no matter the cost. During the 5 years of her reign, more than 280 people were burned at the stake by her command. They did not die in secret. They died in front of everyone. In squares, markets, crossroads, pregnant women, pastors, nobles, beggars. Each death was both a warning and a declaration. The Queen was Catholic, and the kingdom must be as well. Unlike other monarchs who executed for political calculation, Mary did it out of faith. She did not tolerate ambiguity. Obedience was not enough. You had to believe to surrender. And if you didn't, then your screams would become part of the new liturgy. The scene in Oxford was not the only one, but it was the most famous. Because those who died were not anonymous heretics. They were symbols. And because that time, the people understood that the Queen they had long awaited with hope, the legitimate daughter of Catherine of Aragon, the woman unjustly disinherited by Henry VIII, now ruled with cross and flame. Latimer's famous phrase about the candle came true, but not in the way he imagined. The flame did not go out, because Mary kept it alive with bodies. And the world, seeing this, did not grant her heroic titles. It gave her a name that would follow her for centuries: Bloody Mary. Who was Mary, I of England? Mary Tudor was born in 1516, daughter of King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. She was the only one of her siblings to survive childhood. From an early age, her life was marked by prayers, masses, fasting, and devotion. Catherine was deeply Catholic, daughter of the Catholic monarchs, raised with the belief that power and faith were inseparable. And Mary inherited that worldview. During her early years, she was treated as the heir. The king had no male children, and Mary received an education fitting her position. She spoke several languages, read the classics, played music, and debated with scholars. At court, she was considered serious, devout, and disciplined. But all of that shattered when her father decided to break with Rome. Henry VIII, frustrated by his lack of male heirs, sought to annul his marriage to Catherine. The Pope refused, and the king responded with an unprecedented rupture. He founded the Church of England, declared himself its supreme head, and married Anne Boleyn. Catherine was cast aside, and Mary was declared illegitimate. She was only 17 when she went from princess to bastard. She lost her title, her home, her household, and her dignity. She was forced to serve in the household of Anne Boleyn's daughter, Elizabeth. Her mother died alone, isolated and watched, and Mary, humiliated and dragged down by her father's political decisions, swore loyalty to a church she despised, just to survive. That period marked her forever, not just because of the suffering, but because of the betrayal. She had seen how faith could be wiped out by decree, how sacraments were replaced by printed books, how religious images were destroyed in the name of progress, and she had also seen how those who once revered her now treated her like a burden. Her faith did not weaken. It turned to stone. When Anne Boleyn was executed, Mary regained some position, but she never trusted again. Her father took more wives, had more children, more reforms. The country was changing, but she remained loyal to the old religion. She rejected the new Mass, prayed in Latin in private, refused to take unconsecrated bread, and every time she did, she took a risk. Because in Henry's England, the Catholic faith was already considered an obstacle, a relic of the past, a threat. When Henry died in 1547, the throne passed to his son Edward the Thewang, a committed Protestant, only 9 years old. During his brief reign, England became even more hostile toward Catholicism. Traditional rites were banned, the Mass abolished, sacred images confiscated. Mary lived like an uncomfortable relic, confined to her estates, spied on, and watched. Edward wanted to force her to attend the new religious services. She refused, and when ordered by letter, she replied that she would obey, if dragged by force. Her stubbornness kept her alive, but it also left her isolated. For years, she was a silent symbol, a melancholic figure reminding people of an earlier time. She had no army, no solid allies, no real power, but she had a name, a lineage, and the memory of a promise she had made to herself. Restore order, redeem her mother, redeem her God. In 1553, Edward died without heirs. Protestant advisors tried to place Lady Jane Grey on the throne, a young, docile, 16-year-old Protestant, but they underestimated Mary. Within days, the bastard who had been stripped of everything gathered supporters, rode to London, and was proclaimed queen with popular acclaim. At last, after decades of humiliation, solitude, and surveillance, Mary was queen. And now, she could return to England what she believed it should never have lost, its Catholic soul. But she would do it her way, not with diplomacy, not with persuasion, but as it was done in Old Castile, with confessors, with inquisitors, and with fire. First steps in power. When Mary ascended the throne in 1553, she did not do so as an uncertain or conciliatory monarch. She had waited too long, endured too many humiliations, too many years watching Protestantism rip out everything she loved. She did not intend to rule a divided kingdom. She intended to rebuild a pure one. The first step was to abolish the religious reforms introduced by her brother, Edward III. Churches that had stopped offering Mass returned to Latin liturgy. English Bibles were withdrawn. Destroyed altars were restored. The reformist clergy were forced into silence or exile. Every Catholic ritual was reinstated with almost surgical precision, as if attempting to erase every trace of heresy. And in many ways, that was exactly the goal. In November 1554, Cardinal Reginald Pole returned to England as papal legate. He was Mary's cousin, and one of the few English nobles who had remained loyal to Rome during the storm. Accompanied by an official delegation, he publicly proclaimed that the kingdom was returning to the bosom of the Catholic Church. Henry VIII's laws were repealed. England was once again a Catholic state, and the Pope rejoiced. But the spiritual restoration didn't come alone. The monarchy needed a solid alliance to support what was to come. That alliance was sealed with marriage. Against the advice of many counselors and much of the English people, Mary married Philip of Habsburg, son of Emperor Charles V, and future Philip II of Spain. The union wasn't merely political, it was ideological. Mary didn't see Philip as a foreign threat, but as a legitimate heir of the Catholic faith, a modern crusader. The agreement was signed in 1554. Philip arrived in England with his entourage, and the wedding was held in Winchester. But the reception was anything but warm. The people didn't trust a Spanish prince. They feared with good reason that his arrival would bring soldiers, inquisitors, and foreign bishops. They feared Spanish influence would usher in a harsher, more implacable, and more severe style of governance. Unrest followed quickly. In Kent, Thomas Wyatt led a rebellion against the marriage, gathering thousands of men. Although he claimed to defend English independence, it was clear he also feared the Catholic Restoration. The revolt was crushed, and with it Mary delivered her first exemplary blow. Lady Jane Grey, the young woman who had reigned for just 9 days after Edward's death, and whom Mary had initially spared as an act of clemency, was executed. She was only 16. She had led no rebellion, but she was Protestant, and her mere existence gave heretics an alternative. With her death, Mary drew a line. The Queen could forgive, but not more than once. In the following months, the purge was more subtle. There were no burnings yet, but Protestant leaders were silenced. Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, the architect of many of the earlier reforms, was imprisoned. Reformist bishops, like Ridley and Latimer, as well. Sermons were monitored, books censored, and while many pastors abandoned their churches, others fled to the continent. The Queen had not yet begun burning bodies, but she was already burning ideas. Philip, for his part, kept a low profile. He knew his presence was unpopular, and though he did not love Mary, he understood her reign was useful. England, as an ally of the Spanish crown, held strategic value. But what he admired most in his wife was not politics, but her fervor. They shared the belief that Protestantism was not merely doctrinal error. It was rebellion against divine order, something to be eradicated at the root. Parliament, under pressure, restored the laws against heresy. Ecclesiastical courts were once again granted legal authority to try and punish dissenters. To the people, the threat was no longer abstract. It wasn't just mandatory mass anymore. Now there could be punishment. And so, with legality restored, the kingdom was ready. Rome had been readmitted. Philip was at Mary's side. Heresy was defined as a crime, and the enemies were named. What followed was no longer restoration. Now began the punishment. But before the first fire, there were warnings, political executions, silencing, exiles, and close monitoring of the presses. Among the remaining heretics, a certainty spread. Silence was no longer an option. You had to flee or die. The bonfires of England. From 1555 onward, the Kingdom of England began to burn. The first to fall were prominent figures, Bishop Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley. They were tied to the same stake in Oxford, doused in kindling and resin, and the fire was lit at their feet. Both were elderly, respected, and well known. But they died screaming. Latimer managed to say, "This day we light such a candle in England as I trust shall never be put out." He did not say it out of defiance, but out of faith. Mary's hand did not tremble, not at their age, nor their fame. This was not justice, it was a warning. In the following months, the bonfires multiplied. Alongside the imprisoned Protestant leaders, dozens of anonymous citizens were added. Background didn't matter. Clerics and peasants, artisans, pregnant women, widows, teenagers. Even disgraced nobles were burned. The pattern was clear. To refuse renouncing the new faith was to die. Mary did not attend the executions, but she followed them closely. She read reports, requested name lists, and consulted with bishops. To her, it wasn't cruelty. They weren't victims. They were unrepentant sinners. To her, this was purification, and in her view, the fire did not destroy them. It cleansed them. Thomas Cranmer, the former archbishop who had written the Protestant Book of Common Prayer, was among the most symbolic executions. During his imprisonment, he recanted multiple times, signed retractions, and asked forgiveness. He accepted papal authority, yet he was still condemned. On the day of his death, in front of a crowd, he publicly renounced his retractions and declared that his right hand, the one that had signed them, would be the first to burn. He kept his word, thrust his hand into the flames, and did not withdraw it. His flesh burned while he prayed. Cranmer died in the flames in March 1556. With him, the Protestant leadership of Edward VI's reign was completely extinguished. But Mary did not stop there. The doctrine itself had to be eradicated, not just its leaders. The bonfires reached smaller towns: Colchester, Canterbury, Ipswich, Lewes. In each, the execution of heretics became a public spectacle. But no private ritual. Everything had to be seen, everything had to be feared. It's estimated that over 280 people were executed during her reign. And though the number may seem small compared to the religious wars on the continent, the impact was absolute. Never before in England had fire been used on such a scale as legal punishment. It was the first time a government made martyrdom state policy. The machinery worked with precision. The accused was arrested for heresy, tried by an ecclesiastical court, and condemned for refusing to recant. They were given the chance to recant, but if they didn't, they were excommunicated and handed over to secular power, and civil justice carried out the sentence: death by burning. Mary signed with conviction. To her, heresy was more dangerous than rebellion. An idea could spread. A sermon could infect generations. The Protestant faith was a spiritual plague, and fire was the only cure. Many were burned for reading the Bible in English, for not attending Mass, or for teaching their children forbidden doctrines. The control was total. Bishops loyal to Mary blessed every execution as an act of faith. Local authorities complied without protest. Parliament looked the other way, and Rome applauded. But outside England, Mary's image was starting to deteriorate. In Geneva, Calvin called her the English Jezebel. In Germany, pamphlets portrayed her as a bloodthirsty witch. In France, she was seen as a threat. In the Netherlands, Protestants were already calling her Bloody Mary. And within the country, although many pretended obedience, hatred was beginning to take root. Not toward Catholicism itself, but toward the brutal imposition, the disproportionate punishment, the belief that there was only one way to pray. That fire didn't just kill bodies, it was lighting another flame, and this one would not be extinguished by fear. The beginning of the collapse. The English people, who had once seen Mary as a rightful heir and a symbol of justice after the chaos of her brother's reign, began to look at her with contained anger. The inquisitorial trials, the public executions, the imposition of religious rituals. All that had once been tolerated in silence was now whispered about with bitter resentment. There was fear, but there was also frustration, and resentment, unlike fear, never fades. The marriage to Philip II of Spain, far from strengthening her position, made it more fragile. It was a purely political arrangement, and though Mary gave herself entirely to the alliance, dreaming of forming a Catholic dynasty that would last for centuries. The Spanish prince did not share her enthusiasm. He spent little time in England. His appearances were ceremonial and cold, and his face was unknown to the people. His influence, deeply unpopular. Many saw Mary as a submissive queen, ruling in the name of a foreigner. Others feared England would end up absorbed by Habsburg interests. Parliament even drafted clauses to limit Philip's power. He was prohibited from holding office without local approval. He couldn't take gold or soldiers out of the country. He was king consort, but without a crown. And still, he was blamed for every unpopular decision. The most devastating blow came from abroad. In January 1558, England lost Calais, its last stronghold on the continent. It was more than a city. It was a symbol of national pride. It had been under English control for over 2 centuries, and in just a few days, it fell to the French. Mary never recovered from the loss. It's said that upon receiving the news, her words were as sincere as they were tragic. "When I die, and they open my chest, they will find Calais engraved on my heart." It was the final humiliation, a military failure that shattered any remaining sense of legitimacy. To all this, personal tragedy was added. The Queen believed she was pregnant twice. The kingdom prepared, masses were held, processions celebrated, physicians confirmed it, Parliament drafted succession laws. But the heir never came. There was no heartbeat, no birth. Some spoke of phantom pregnancy, others of misdiagnoses. But the court understood what that empty womb meant. There would be no Catholic future, not with her. Over time, loneliness became the norm at court. Philip no longer returned. Former allies like Cardinal Pole were ill or dying. The nobles who had once supported the Catholic Restoration now feared the possibility of another wave of purges. Obedience began to falter from exhaustion, and amid it all, Mary's body began to fail. Chronic abdominal pain, swelling, intermittent fevers, bleeding. Doctors didn't know what to do. Privately, they whispered about uterine cancer. Darker rumors spoke of divine punishment. Others simply saw her as aged, deteriorated, childless, without allies, consumed by the very fire she had ignited. She ruled until the end, but the crowds were gone. No more letters from Rome filled with joy, no more candles lit for the kingdom's salvation, only the hushed murmurs of a court that awaited her death with more relief than sorrow. Mary never gave up. She never accepted failure. In her letters and confessions, she still spoke of God, of duty, of the soul of England. But her voice no longer convinced, and her gaze, once firm, wandered through quiet rooms where no one believed in her cause anymore. She had ruled with cross and flame, but in her final months, neither the cross comforted her, nor the flame protected her. Only smoke remained. By the autumn of 1558, the Queen's body no longer responded. It wasn't just the pain, it was the smell. Her closest servants noticed her breath smelled of rusted iron. Her skin was paler than ever, and exhaustion no longer faded with sleep. Bloodletting was useless, so were prayers. And doctors murmured what no one dared say aloud. Mary was dying. For weeks, she signed no decrees. She barely spoke. She didn't ask to see anyone. Only her confessor had unrestricted access, and to him she repeated the same phrase. I did not fail. It was the people who failed the test. In the Queen's eyes, the fault wasn't hers, but the realm's. She had executed heretics, yes, but she had also tried to save souls. She had returned England to the true faith. If people didn't understand the sacrifice, it was because the devil spoke louder than God. St. James's Palace became a cloister. King Philip was not there. He'd left long before, and though informed of her condition, he never returned. Instead, he sent a short, cold letter. "I regret her illness. May God receive her with mercy." For the woman who had loved him, it was worse than abandonment. It was confirmation. On November 17, 1558, Mary I died at the age of 42. The news was not met with national mourning, but with a collective sigh of relief. There were no protests, no uprisings in her name. What followed was a silence of relief. And after that silence, the immediate proclamation of her sister, Elizabeth. Mary had insisted to the end on preventing her half-sister from succeeding her. She feared her reign would erase everything she had built. Elizabeth I entered London a few days later with a clear message. The kingdom would return to Protestantism, not by fire, but by reform. Within weeks, laws were repealed, courts were closed, exiles were allowed to return, crosses were removed, altars simplified. The kingdom breathed again, but it did not forget, because the nickname was already sealed, Bloody Mary. It wasn't a later invention. It was how people described what they had lived through. Not because of her origins, her faith, or even her politics, but because of the flames, the smoke, and the screams in the plazas. Her remains were buried in Westminster Abbey, next to Elizabeth's body. In life, they were enemies. In death, they shared a tomb. And even today, a plaque reads, "Partners in throne and sisters in blood." Partners on the throne, sisters in blood. But only one was remembered with respect, the other with fear. Catholic chroniclers tried to soften her image. They spoke of her unwavering faith, her battle against spiritual corruption. They said she had been betrayed by fate, by infertility, by her surroundings. But none of that erased the numbers. Over 280 people died by fire under her reign. And fire does not purify in memory. It only leaves scars. Her image was trapped in popular imagination, a somber queen, dressed in black, with a fixed gaze and a hard voice. In stories, in legends, even in superstitions, to say her name in front of a mirror 5 times is still believed to summon her spirit. It's a modern invention, yes, but born of ancient fear. Because some names carry the weight of what they did. Mary. I wanted to save the soul of England. She wanted to restore a lost order, a world that no longer existed. She believed the kingdom could turn back. But time doesn't forgive, and nations don't forget. She gave everything she had for a cause. But the cause did not survive. And her name, instead of becoming an honor, became a warning. She died convinced she had done the right thing. And that is precisely what made her so dangerous.